Welcome to the World War II Center, folks. I'm one of the guys that put a stop to the Germans' dream for world domination, and it cost us many lives, and it was a hard battle. Many hard battles were fought in France. In 1944, in December, the temperature was down pretty close to zero. The snow was probably 2 feet deep, and it was cold enough that your bones would pop every time you moved, just about. But I never had a cold. I was never sick. The Lord saw to it that none of my people were sick or we didn't even sneeze. But we fired the monster gun that was my outfit had. It weighed 17 tons, and there were 12 of them. I fired one of them. Each gun, in a matter of about 7 or 8 months, fired some just over 1 million pounds of high explosive on the German army. Very effective weapons we had. We had by now it's primitive equipment. That telephone you see there with the leather beside the white helmet, that's what gave me my information to how to fire. The information would come over the telephone, something like this. Battery adjust, shell HEM 106, charge 5, fuse delay, battery 3 rounds, fire when ready. And so then we would load and fire as soon as we could until those 3 rounds were accomplished, and we waited for further orders over the phone. So we were very effective against tanks. They attack generally in a V shape, with the point of the V being up ahead, and then with an open center where their walking troops, their backup was protected in there. And our first objective was to wipe out those walking troops to take away the backup from the tanks. Then we could concentrate on the tanks individually. And we didn't actually have to hit one with the monster that we had. We didn't actually have to put it right on him. Anywhere within 10, 15 feet would flip him right over and kill everybody inside with the concussion. If one of those shells landed here, there would not be a person alive in this building. Tremendous explosion. In hard ground, it'd knock a hole big enough to bury a truck in. So it was a very effective weapon, and of course we backed up the tanks. The tanks are represented on the picture behind me. I was in direct support of number 4 there, the 4th Armored. It was General Patton's favorite point for his, when we attacked, that number 4 led, and we were right behind them, backing them up. When they met tanks who had them outgunned, we came into play. If they got stalled out against an emplacement that was reinforced concrete, we fired long enough to break through. Sometimes we could put round after round right in the same hole and break the concrete and reduce the machine guns that were inside and protect our infantry who was attacking ahead of us. We fired some 65,000 rounds in about 6 months, night and day. I had a bath after 4 months, the first one I'd had in all winter, and nobody else had a bath either. So we were very busy trying to stop them rascals from shoving us into the ocean. But the Lord favored us. The sun came out. They had pushed us back 50 miles, but the sun came out. Our 8th TAC, our Air Force got into the air, and our fighter bombers went behind them and blew the bridges that they came over on and trapped them. And then every time we caught up with them, we hammered them from the back, and the Air Force hit them from the top. And if they didn't have sense enough to throw their helmets away and their weapons and surrender, throw their arms up, they died by the thousands. We wiped out the bulk of the German army. By the time they reached the Rhine River, they were running for their lives practically. The SS troops are very tenacious fighters, and even though they were retreating, they would pick a good spot and set up an ambush for us. And they got a lot of our troops that way. We lost the Third Army lost from D-Day on. My outfit lost the Third Army lost some 25,000 men killed and wounded. We paid a price. But we persevered, and on D-Day, on VE Day, on May the 8th, which is soon coming up. Next week, it'll be May the 8th. On May the 8th, they laid down their arms and surrendered, and we stopped the fight. And then my personal war started. They sent me to Dachau since I didn't have points enough to come home. My outfit broke up, and they sent me individually into a new outfit, which had just relieved Dachau. And when I reached there, I found out why we had to stop them. Those poor people. They were so pitiful, starved down to skin and bones. Children that should have weighed 80 or 90 pounds were down to 30 and 25 pounds. Some of the people were starved till they were not able to walk. They were emaciated, covered in lice. Rats and mice were everywhere. The smell was tremendous, and the human misery. You could smell that poor place from a quarter mile away if the wind came to you. And that's why we're talking now, and why the Lord has brought me. All my leaders are gone, long gone. I'm still here, left by the Lord, a man out of time, to tell you we should not be doing that kind of stuff to each other. We're supposed to be loving each other. We should never be out there killing each other. We should be helping. And that's my message to you young folks. When somebody starts telling you that because somebody is a different race or a different color or a different this or that or the other, you're going to say, I'm instructing you now, say, no, we don't do that. And we're not going to do that. And we're not going to keep quiet when we see it going on. We're going to stop that. So that's history being repeated, and we have to remember and never forget how horrible that was. I wish I had words to tell you how horrible it was, but I have no words to tell you how horrible it was. Helpless people. The stated object of those camps, and there were over 100 of them. Dachau was just one of at least 100 in various countries where he had started wiping out the population. He had 300,000 trained killers that operated the trains to bring the people in, make slaves out of them. Those that were strong enough, they put to work at slave labor. Those that were not suitable for slave labor, They bayoneted the children if they caused any trouble. If they did, they lived long enough to be sent to the 4 furnaces that were in Dachau. They had 4 furnaces that operated 24 hours a day, and when a person died or was killed or gassed or bayoneted, they burned them, and their ashes. Each furnace had a spout that went down into the basement, and all the ashes were collected in one large wooden tub down there. The walls were ringed with little urns with a removable top on them, and if their people sent the right amount of money to the camp, they would scoop you out a sugar scoop of ashes from the community ashes that were there, and put that person's name on it and send it out. And so I can't verify that actually happened, but all the pots were still there, the ashes were still there, and the sugar scoops were still in place. So I would assume, I was told that this is exactly what happened, and I presume it was true. We had an awful time trying to talk to the people, because there were at least 16 different languages represented in the very camp that I helped to liberate, and we were very handicapped by not being able to talk to them. Our counterintelligence corps at the time, the CIC, eventually in about a week got us a couple of interpreters, and things got better. And from then on, things began. The doctors came in, the nurses to help us out, and until then, our emergency people that did the war wounds and all, they were on their own, and they were not qualified, just like we were not qualified to, that it was very hard to so many different diseases, so many different things medically to be done, and of course but eventually things got better. But in the meanwhile, it was very difficult. The sight of those people would make a flint rock cry. So the message that we have, and that this entire thing is put up to send a message. We are never going to forget, and we're never going to allow that to happen again on this planet, as long as we're alive and able to prevent it. And we'll be watching, and when something like that starts to happen, we're going to be as alert and as possibly the Lord will let us. He allowed me to go. He saved me. I almost never got a scratch, and there was one bright spot that I'll tell you about before you leave. We were coming up for close fire on an emplacement, and we fired most of the day, and reduced one of the bunkers, and were successful. But in firing, the Germans got flash and sound. They had a system that when you fired too long, the flash of the gun and the speed of the light and the speed of sound, when the sound, by that they could tell exactly where you were if you fired enough from the same position. And unfortunately, number 4 gun, where my friend was one of the ones that was most accurate. He fired the most, and that's the one they concentrated on. About 1 o'clock in the morning, they hit that gun, and they destroyed the tires off the gun and killed the crew, killed 5 of them outright. My friend was wounded horribly, and one other man was wounded, and we got there within possibly a minute. The snow was already turned red all around them, and they were bleeding. These 2 men were bleeding terribly, but we managed to get enough first aid packets in place and powdered, used the sulfur powder for their wounds, and put them on a Jeep and sent them back to first aid. And I heard that my friend was the last link from my outfit. He was the last one, and so we heard he died on the way. And so I kept hoping that he would come back to the outfit, but he never did. But 30 years later, I'm sitting by the phone one night, and it rang, and I picked it up, and somebody said, "Gene?" I said, "Yes, who is this?" He said, "Glen Mounts." I said, "I don't know who you are, and I better not find out who you are, because Glen died in France, and he's buried over there somewhere, and he died under the flag, and I don't appreciate anybody trying to impersonate him." He said, "Gene, do you remember at Fort Bragg when your tent blew away and you and Sukum were laying there and the rain was coming down in your face?" I said, "Glen, it is you." I couldn't believe my ears. He said, I'm not dead, and I'm not buried in France, and I'm very much alive, and I'm coming down to see you." So he did. That was on a weekend, and Monday he was there. So we had a tremendous reunion. He finally tracked me down. How he did it, I'm not sure. He don't even know exactly how. He kept calling my hometown, and I hadn't been there in 25 years. But somebody gave him my current number. Who, I have no idea. So that is a bright spot. Not everything was grim or bad. There were some bright spots, and that was one of them. Although it was delayed a long time. It took him a long time to find me. But all the mementos that I have from Fort Bragg, where we trained, he got for me. I have quite a few of his mementos. He said those were payback for my first aid packet that I used on him. So, yeah, I talked to him about a month ago. We had about an hour conversation. We're fast friends, all the way from Fort Bragg in 1944. It goes back that far. So, his very similar background. He was married about the same time I was. He had 4 children. I had 4, and so his wife is not able to travel, and my wife is in a rest home, not able to travel. So, but he's still like myself, pretty agile. The Lord has seen fit to bring us through, and it is such a grateful time, and such a pleasure to talk to you young folks in particular, and to tell you that the Lord is expecting you to oppose any of these things that you're hearing today, that you're seeing the inhuman treatment that these people got, and listening to some of them talk. You should be thinking in your mind that if this ever, that you're never going to allow these things to be repeated. None of you, I hope, will ever have to be faced with what I was faced with. It is not a good thing to see the inhumanity. I could not, at 18, I could not believe that people could be so horrible to each other. But it all ended well. We wiped that off the face of the earth finally. It took over 1 million of our men to do so, and we lost a tremendous amount of people doing it. But our country is still able to have the freedom, most of it, that it always had, and God has blessed this nation. And He is expecting us to do better than we have been doing in the past time. I know He's expecting us to do better. We will do better, won't we? Yes, we will. We'll be watching if things are going to, these things start to crop up. We're going to be listening and speaking out and saying no to them. Thank you for coming. And if you have questions, I'll take some. I appreciate you coming so much. Anybody for a question? Anything, I'll try. I've forgotten a lot of details, but I remember some. Oh yeah, by the time I got to Duck, I was 19. And by the time I was 19, I had 4 months of combat under my belt. So I was the age of some of these kids almost. So, and that should not be. We just should not be faced with that at that tender age in particular. It is very traumatic to face. It certainly was hard to live with all these years. I've tried to forget it, but the Lord has said, remember it, go ahead, cry if you want to, but talk. So I'm talking and I'm crying.
You're how old now?
And my next birthday I will be 90. And I'm still able to jump a few stumps. Not very high stumps, but I can jump a few. Yes, sir. My training was on that field wire and communications, involved that telephone and switchboards. And I never used that training. I had 8 hours of cannoneering to prepare me for that monster. And that was it. In 8 hours, I learned what I knew about how to load and fire a weapon of that size. But the little pop gun I was training on was a 105. It was no touch as big as that monster that I was assigned to. In an hour after I was there, I was firing that weapon just like a pro. I was 20 when I got home. Didn't get enough after that. I joined the Air Force. Yes. You know, I didn't know that Pearl Harbor happened until Monday. It happened on Sunday, and we didn't have a radio, so I didn't hear about it until I got to school. I was going to high school at the time. And the principal called us into the auditorium and told us that, and everybody's looking at everybody else and saying, "Where's Pearl Harbor? What is that?" And so it turned out we had that. There we were at war, and had been at war for 24 hours, and we didn't even know it. So, communication was very scarce in those days. No TV, and a few radios, but we didn't have one. Nine months. I stayed 9 months. We put as many of the perpetrators of those camps as we could find. Once in a while, somebody would turn up, and we were a holding area. I was one of the guards that went in to strip search them and be sure they didn't have any weapons or anything they could commit suicide with. They were. I could tell they looked at me like I was a worm. I'm a pretty short guy and not very impressive looking, I'm sure. Even now, I'm not. I don't look much like a soldier, I don't think. But they would look down. They were tall, big, tall people, and of course the SS were chosen for their impressive size and their fighting ability. So I'm sure they never could realize how a bunch of high schoolers managed to destroy the best army they ever had. It's a mystery to me to this day. I don't know how we did it. It was the Lord's work. They ran out of supplies. We didn't. I was drafted. They beat me to it by about a week. I planned to volunteer, but by the time I turned 18, my greetings came through the mail. Your president needs you. So I was drafted, but I certainly would have volunteered had they waited just one more week. And that's a strange little story. I had been working in Ohio, and I had been making payments on our little 7 acres that we had finally been able to have, and my dad had built a little house on it, and we were going to have a mortgage burning ceremony as we paid off the last payment on our mortgage, and that was going to happen. And when my final check came from Ohio, where I'd been working, and that's why I was delaying my volunteering for the service, and so. But I never got to see the mortgage. The money came after I went to the Army, and they paid the mortgage off and had the mortgage burning, but I wasn't there. I was running through the pine forest down in Fort Bragg. Well, thank you all so much for coming and listening to me. I'm proud of every one of you, and together we're going to make it better than it was then.